When the math genius Max took his own life, he was found holding a picture with hot celebrity Susan. It got leaked online. On the back of the photo was a short message, "Never forget." Soon after, Susan released a photo of them together as teens, expressing her own sorrow. Everyone was shocked by his deep affection and regretted what they missed. But me? I'm Max's legal wife. I took care of him for 10 whole years, yet now I'm labeled the third party by everyone. They blame me for everything, like I'm some dark spirit attached to a genius, leeching off him by taking advantage of his illness. Under the weight of public outrage, I lost hope and ended my own life too. But when I opened my eyes again, Susan and I both got a second chance. This time, she didn't want to miss Max and married him before I could. Me? Rather than struggling to care for a high-functioning autistic genius my whole life, I chose to become the genius myself. Standing in front of Max's grave, I was surprisingly calm. Last time I stood here, there weren't so many reporters with their cameras around. Now, their questions were sharp and brutal. Mrs. Mary, did you intentionally interfere with Mr. Max and Emma's Susan's relationship? Did you exploit Mr. Max's high-functioning autism to trick him into marriage? As Max's partner, did you really miss any signs of his suicidal thoughts? Rumors say you just used Max as a money machine, is that true? That day was gloomy. I stood there and felt a ridiculous twitch at the corner of my mouth. I was Max's legal wife from age 23 to 33, a full decade. Max, my father's student, needed extra care due to his condition. So, at my dad's request, I became Max's assistant. Max was pale, thin, and disheveled, spending every day on math problems I couldn't understand. I was new and still learning about him, and I made a mistake of misplacing a paper, which caused him to pace anxiously, biting his fingers all night. I always felt a bit guilty towards him. I read all the psychology books on high-functioning autism at the library and gradually learned Max's habits. Eventually, I became his closest assistant. Max was cold but had a gentle smile when I didn't understand him, and looked content when I organized his room. I fell in love with him one moment at a time. When Max asked me to marry him, I thought the gods of love heard my prayers, and I happily agreed. Little did I know, Max married me just to secure the Fields Medal without complications. He had promised a girl to declare his love for her before the world. The girl was Susan. On the day Max won the award, the news came out about Susan marrying a rich heir named Jack. The rain poured that day, and Max came home looking lost, his wet black suit sticking to his skin, making him look like a sad puppy. I didn't know what had happened, but I knew when Max was upset, he liked to stay in his windowless study with a single yellow light and heaps of math papers. That was his safe haven, and I wasn't supposed to interrupt. So I watched Max go into that room, then turn to make strawberry cake, his favorite. The next day was our anniversary, and Max had just won the Fields Medal. I was in good spirits, humming as I took the cake to his study, only to find his lifeless body and a photo with Susan, inscribed with a short sentence, "Never forget." After that, everything felt like an absurd and confusing dream. One of my father's students revealed online how much Max adored Susan and praised him for breaking out of his autistic shell to love someone. They said I manipulated my position as his assistant to make Max marry me after 2 years of taking care of him. There were claims that since I handled all Max's work, all his earnings must be under my name. Otherwise, how did I afford to be a housewife for 10 years without working? Our home was flooded with people, police, coroners, reporters, even Fields Medal officials. Everyone's eyes on me were filled with suspicion and disdain, and I could barely breathe. Wasn't I Max's closest person? I was his wife, his assistant, I was. Suddenly, it hit me, I was never the person Max truly loved. What a cruel joke. Max left peacefully, leaving me behind to sink into the mud of this world. It's all Mary's fault, she robbed Susan's life. A homewrecker is just a homewrecker, can't you see Max would rather die than be with her? Why wasn't it Mary who died? If she did, Max and Susan would have been happy. Yeah, Mr. Max loved Susan so much, he was willing to give up his life. It breaks my heart. These harsh, venomous words surrounded me as I sat by Max's grave, staring at his photo, and carefully leaned against his tombstone. My name had been scratched out from the wife of Max inscription, whoever did it thought I didn't deserve to be his wife. Did Max think the same? Why else would he deceive me for 10 years? Reflecting back, I rarely leaned on Max like that. At the time, I thought it was just his autism making him sensitive to contact. But after his death, Susan posted a photo online, a young 17-year-old Susan and Max. Max's hand rested gently on Susan's waist, his delicate fingers visible in the sunlight, holding her with such care and hidden joy in his eyes. Susan looked slightly impatient, but they still took that photo. It marked their love and became evidence of me being the interloper. I knew what Susan meant with that photo. She regretted missing Max's love, even though she'd married into her teenage dream wealthy family and shot to fame as the genius mathematician's flame in showbiz. Yet, she still regretted. Susan was always a greedy woman. She used these so-called pieces of evidence to stir up an online witch hunt against me. She twisted the truth around because she needed Max's love to take her further in the entertainment industry. As long as I was Max's late wife for a day, there was always a chance she'd get exposed for who she truly was, the person constantly nagging Max for money. Calmly, I lifted the knife in my hand and aimed it at my heart, slowly pushing it in. My blood trickled down my wrist, yet I felt no pain, just a warm feeling lifting my soul away from this world. Yeah, I couldn't accept what a failure my life had become. My love, my sacrifice, my marriage, it was all a joke. I had become a tool for a man's pursuit of love. I was always gentle on the outside but strong inside, and my dad used to sigh and say my character wasn't good, warning that being too rigid meant easy to break. His words turned out to be a prophecy. My soul drifted out, watching my dad grow a head of white hair overnight and witnessing Susan publicly slander me for clinging to Max even in death. Even my demise couldn't stop those who had once bullied me online. I saw Ivan, one of my father's other students, running around explaining things. Even though his voice was tiny, he kept telling the truth. People accused him of using my dad's connections to clear my name, but he didn't care and kept explaining how good a person I was. 10 years after I died, Ivan finally cleaned my name with all the evidence he had gathered, but by then, no one cared anymore. Max, if I could do it all again, I'd stay far away from you. I paused, staring at the draft paper in my hand. I didn't expect that the internet's wish for a rebirth for Max would happen to me instead. I was back to when I was 23, the day before Max proposed. I remember it was July 13th when Max asked me to marry him. I spent the whole night organizing Max's study, tidying up his drafts. One topic on his draft caught my eye, so I sat on the floor and started solving it. My dad is a math professor at Cambridge, and under his influence, I picked up some math skills myself, which is why I ended up as Max's assistant. The draft with my steps was carelessly placed on the ground until Max found it the next day. It was a crucial step in Max's proof of a graph theory conjecture. That day, Max looked at me for the first time with emotion in his eyes. "Mary, will you marry me?" His voice was just like I remembered, cold and precise. I looked up at the 23-year-old Max before me, curiosity in my eyes. "Max, do you want to marry me just because of this draft?" While facing his proposal again, I gently stepped back and patted his shoulder. "You're joking, right?" Max's eyes were a light amber, clear and strikingly beautiful under the dim study light. He just looked at me, confused, not understanding why the once servile me was now refusing him. I folded the draft paper and put it in my pocket. "You've been unreachable for 3 days, and I thought something happened to you. I came by, and when I saw you were sleeping, I didn't disturb you," I explained. But Max looked even more puzzled. He couldn't grasp why someone who was always so patient and gentle with him would suddenly sound so distant. He cautiously reached out a cool hand to clasp my wrist, silently watching with a stubborn air. Max was tall, about 6 feet 2, but skinny and quiet. He had a habit of slightly lowering his head, using his fringe to shield from the outside world. Bent over, he held my wrist and looked up at me, waiting for an answer. In my past life, I would already have been head over heels. Max really was like a charmer, every move tugging at my heartstrings, making me want to give up everything just to stay by his side. Beyond math, Max spoke slowly and softly, with a touch of vagueness. "Mary, what's wrong?" Even though Max's fingertips were cool, his touch burned, making my wrist tremble. I almost fell under his spell again. But then I remembered why I hadn't been able to reach him for those 3 days. While I worried sick about Max's whereabouts, he had been standing outside Susan's building for a day and night, waiting for her, even though she never showed up. I pulled my hand back and shook my head. "Mary, don't be naive. You were fooled for 10 years last time, do you want to be again in this life?" Max didn't suddenly develop autism, he was always a peculiar child. He didn't talk until he was 3, had no friends, and except for Susan. Max's parents tried everything. They traveled everywhere seeking child psychologists, and even when they realized Max couldn't be cured, supported his interests and social training. Susan's and Max's families were close, and Susan was pressured into being Max's only friend. But Susan couldn't stand Max. She thought he was weird and got annoyed when Max badgered her with questions. If Max weren't so good-looking and a good social accessory, Susan wouldn't even bother being nice to him. Back then, Susan liked to flaunt Max as someone handsome and obedient. Before proposing to me, Max had gone to find Susan again, bringing an expensive necklace bought with his prize money. How he managed to buy it, overcoming his social anxiety, or what he felt as he waited at Susan's place for so long, I'll never know. In our 10-year marriage, Max and I never went out on a date. Because I felt for his social fears, I spent a decade staying at home with him, going out only when he needed to work. I went to movies, had meals, shopped, all by myself. Yet even while I was out, part of me worried about him being home alone. And Max, of course, enjoyed the nice things I did for him, living comfortably in the safe haven I created for him. Susan was dropped off by a Rolls-Royce, and as she looked at the necklace Max handed her, she scoffed, "This necklace is so tacky. My boyfriend's necklace could buy 100 of these cheap things." High-functioning autism makes it tough to grasp others' emotions. Max just stared at the necklace Susan tossed into the trash and asked, "You don't like it?" Susan playfully patted Max's face, "Silly boy, you don't like me, do you?" Max nodded solemnly, stammering a bit, "Like you." Susan laughed hard, her perfectly styled curls swaying along. "What would I do with a silly boy's affection?" She pointed at the car behind her. "The guy chasing me drives a car you could never afford in your life. Besides a good-looking face, what else do you have?" "Oh, right, you're good at math." She stopped smiling. "Society isn't school. What good is being good at math gonna do?" Done talking, Susan waved her hand and turned away, no longer interested in chatting with Max, who seemed not to understand. Max fidgeted nervously, pacing. "Money? Make money. I'm not a fool. Like. Mom, Susan doesn't like me. To marry Susan, I need to make money." It wasn't until the sky darkened that he stopped and returned to the apartment my father rented for him. From then on, Max started figuring out ways to make money. Online, he found that a sure way to have a proposal accepted was to give a happy, romantic proposal in front of the world, declaring love openly. The next second, Max spotted my scrap paper. "Max, did you only marry me because of my scrap paper? I'm so curious, why did Max, who loved Susan so much, marry me?" Max was still staring at his empty hand, where mine once was. After I patiently asked again, he shook his head. "I married you because I wanted to marry you." I felt like I couldn't breathe, like all the air was sucked out of the room. "Max doesn't lie, but I can't believe you anymore." The phone ringing shattered the silence in the room. Max rummaged around for his phone, still ringing, and accidentally tripped and fell. I couldn't take it, so I found his phone stuck in the couch cushions and handed it to him. Max held the phone with both hands. "Hello, Susan?" Slowly, I calmed the turmoil in my heart, listening to Susan's excited voice on the line, glancing at my watch, and quietly leaving the study room, gently closing the door behind me. Before the door shut, I overheard Susan's voice, distorted by static. "Max, do you want to marry me?" I paused. Is Susan back too? But it doesn't matter now. In this life, I'll keep my distance from Max. Returning home, I saw my father's somewhat serious face and sat across from him. "Dad, maybe we should get Max a new assistant." Although my father is a math professor, oddly enough, he's always had high emotional intelligence. Maybe it's because he raised me alone after Mom died when I was little. He raised an eyebrow, put on his glasses, and looked at me, not chasing after him anymore. My face flushed with shame. "Dad. What are you talking about?" Dad closed his laptop, an understanding look in his eyes. "Mary, you know about high-functioning autism. It's hard for them to understand what love means. When you were crazy about Max, you nearly forgot yourself. I'm your dad, I couldn't say much. But I hope my daughter gets the best of everything, including real love." My eyes stung a bit. I got what my dad meant. He thought Max didn't understand love. Staying with Max meant I'd always be the one giving more in the relationship. And truth is, right before I married Max in my past life, Dad said the same things. I opened my mouth, but didn't say that Max actually understands love, he just doesn't love me. I nodded heavily. I'll listen to you, Dad. My dad smiled, listening to this old man's advice. Huh? I have plenty of grad students. You got your eye on one? I'll get you his number. In my past life, I saw my dad cry beside my corpse, regretting letting me become Max's assistant. He always had 5 grad students a year, with Max being his favorite. Max was gifted in math, and if not for his high-functioning autism, studying abroad would have been best for him. My dad took Max as his star student after his college professor recommended him. Dad made me Max's assistant, but he didn't expect I'd fall for Max. Besides Max, Dad had 7 or 8 other grad students. I shook my head, pulled the scrap of paper from my pocket, and sat beside Dad to show him. Right now, I don't even want to talk about love. Dad studied the paper I scribbled on, a bit surprised yet pleased. Is this a theory about graph conjecture? I nodded. What do you think? He smiled proudly. My daughter is remarkable. Then he gave me one of his students' contacts. Mary, if you verify the graph conjecture, you'll be the next Fields medalist. Your junior, Ivan, is researching the same stuff. Here's his contact. Discuss things with each other. Hearing the familiar name, I felt a chill clutch my phone, vividly recalling that defiant young man from before. I always thought Ivan and I were just acquaintances, but I was wrong. He spent so much time clearing things up about me. I almost wanted to ask, for someone who's already dead, why bother? Staring at the familiar profile picture on my phone, I hesitated, then sent a friend request. Hi, I'm Mary. In my past life, Ivan and I barely crossed paths, yet he was a turning point in my life. It was when Max was breaking through the graph conjecture, and I stayed up nights by his side, calculating, messing up, recalculating. Ivan sought me out, proposing we co-author a paper on another aspect of the conjecture. If I agreed, I'd be the first author, but he needed one critical step from my graph conjecture for his work. Max curled up nervously in the corner by the couch, like a fragile butterfly, never feeling safe enough, and even after nights without sleep, he tightly held onto me. Ivan set a choice before me: work with him for a Nature publication or use my data to support Max's graph theory for the Fields Medal. In my past life, if I knew Max just wanted to use the award moment to propose to Susan, I'd have partnered with Ivan. So here I am, getting a second chance at life and a do-over on some choices. I'm lying in my old teenage bedroom, a place I haven't been in ages. Being Max's everything for so long made me forget how life was before him. Life with Max meant doing all the house chores, sorting his drafts, easing his anxiety, making sure he didn't panic, and being his spokesperson to the world. I had basically no life of my own, just supporting Max and Susan. Seems like Susan got a second go-round, too. She told Max about wanting to marry him. Did he agree? Judging by how head over heels he is, for sure he did. Whatever, let them be. I pulled the blanket over my head and thought, time to start my own life. I quit being Max's assistant over the next few days, and never stepped foot in his place again. I heard Susan moved in. When my dad mentioned it, he seemed a bit mad, kinda felt like Max didn't waste a second letting some other girl take over my spot. But my dad's a classy old guy, he mulled it over before saying, Mary, I'll find you someone better, like that Ivan guy. You met him yet? Staring at Ivan's address in my phone, I waved it off. Nah. We're just study buds. After tons of texts, this was my first time meeting Ivan in person. We met at a cafe. Sitting by the window with a book, he looked up just as I walked over and touched his book gently. At that moment, it was like his eyes held an entire universe of emotions. Mary, he said. But in a blink, it was gone, and I thought I imagined it. He didn't look a bit like the reserved, sorrowful Ivan from my previous life after I died. Now, Ivan had bold red hair, definitely not your typical scholar. With a bit of attitude, he didn't even call me senior. I tapped his forehead. Call me senior. Ivan scoffed. Nah. He's always been like that. Last time around, he was furious, asking why I didn't claim credit for my academic work and letting Max take it instead. Ivan even confronted Max over not including me in a paper on graph theory. Max just fiddled with his hands, mumbling, Mary and I are married, so, Ivan went off, did you marry her for your gain? Poor Max had no clue what got Ivan so riled up, lost in his world. Ivan knocked the book from Max's hands, sparking chaos in the room. Max stomped around, shouting, "What is your problem? Don't touch my books. Mary, kick him out." Max, looking all helpless, cried to me, almost like a little kid wanting his mom. Even though Max is older, Ivan seemed more assertive. Ivan ranted, "Mary is your wife, not your mom, fool. Act right. Love your wife. You're not fit for her." Back then, I figured Max saw me as his closest person, so he naturally came to me for support when things got tough. I calmed things down and let Ivan out. Despite being so imposing, Ivan followed like a giant cat the instant I tugged his hat. As I dragged him off, Ivan grumbled, "Why did you marry him?" I softly replied, "I guess I liked him." A few words stuck in my throat that I didn't dare say. As I walked away, he quietly mumbled, "If only I'd met you first." At home, Max wouldn't let go of my hands, rubbing them incessantly. "What's up with you?" I sensed Max wasn't in a good mood. He was quiet for ages before whispering reluctantly, "You touched him." Giggling, I went to the bathroom to wash my hands with soap just to humor him. He finally relaxed a bit. That night, his hand found its way to mine in bed, the one that had pulled Ivan's hat. It was one of those rare intimate moments, making me believe Max really did like me. Snap back to the present, with Ivan cutting into my thoughts. "What's on your mind, Mary?" I propped my chin, teasing, wondering why you don't call me by my title. Before I finished, Ivan plopped his book on the table, ears a bit pink, looking at me shyly. He forced himself to look at me, his eyes a little misty. This seemed more like the Ivan from this life, not the version I knew in the last. "Mary, let's talk about this paper." After my passing in the previous life, I saw through Ivan's feelings. I was not oblivious, just too engrossed in Max to notice when Ivan's feelings emerged. Back then, I brushed them aside. Ivan started discussing his new project. That's how life went on without Max. Occasionally, my dad would mention Max and Susan, saying they planned to get married, skipping a wedding, just getting the paperwork done. I understood why Susan wanted to marry Max. That photo from the last go had made her feel like the luckiest woman alive, everyone praising how a genius mathematician's love seemed to burst through his autism, leaving Susan in the limelight. Max's love had elevated her. This time around, Susan saw the chance to relive that, understandably not wanting to miss it. Max loved her so much, and if they were together, he'd treat her well. But Susan seemed to forget that it was future genius Max who could inflate her ego, not now, a regular Max grappling with autism. Taking care of Max wasn't easy. I spent 2 whole years learning psychology, tuning into Max's routines and body language, starting from scratch. But Susan never really gave Max the time of day. She only stuck with Max to secure the title of being a genius mathematician's wife. Without me, Max might still win the Fields Medal, but not in 10 years, it'd take much longer. At this moment, just like in the past life, Susan has just stepped into the entertainment industry, a nobody trying to rely on rich kids to get noticed. In this life, she's trying to replicate the path of a genius mathematician's beloved. Susan began making vlogs with Max, and Max's stunning looks made her vlogs go viral overnight. Susan indeed got famous, as Max's wife, that is. Although Max hasn't won any awards yet, she markets her vlogs with tags about daily life with a mathematical genius. What Susan didn't expect was that she didn't become a hit in the entertainment industry. Instead, everyone saw her as Max's wife. All the trivial invitations came her way. Yet, just as she wished, she made a lot of money using Max. I ran into Max again at a mathematics forum. Ivan and I were there on behalf of my dad, and Max was invited because of his latest mathematical contributions. But his latest work wasn't about his graph theory conjecture, it was a new research direction in math. Watching Max from afar, I noticed he looked thinner, a bit anxious, his fingers twitching. He was forced to hold hands with Susan. Susan, in a fancy gown, seemed out of place. Most attendees were math experts in suits or casual clothes. Here, no one cared about the price of clothing or wealth. It was all about math. Susan seemed lost between past and present, modestly standing by Max with a hint of pride in her eyes. She tried to exude charm when anyone greeted Max. "Yes, that's right, I'm Max's wife. We've known each other for ages. Max liked me first, he had a crush on me for years." I could see Max was close to breaking down. Crowds always made him tense, and Susan was adding to his stress. Max's fingers kept twitching, and then he turned and saw me. In front of everyone, he pulled his hand from Susan's grasp and walked quickly towards me. Max's eyes showed reliance, his tone rising, showing his happiness. "Mary, why haven't I seen you in so long?" As he said this, he tried to sit next to me, reaching to touch my sleeve. But Ivan swiftly pushed Max aside and sat by me, slapping his hand away. Ivan's move was smooth and seamless, leaving me speechless. Ivan lifted his chin. "Talk if you want, stop with the handsy stuff." Max didn't even glance at Ivan, his eyes stayed on me. The meeting hadn't started, and people scattered in the hall began to look over. Max leaned down, looking at me as if I were his everything. Mary, why did you leave?" I looked at Susan approaching and signaled to Max. "Max, your wife is coming over." Susan didn't look happy. She yanked Max to her side and said snidely, "Miss Mary, you're still good at being a homewrecker." I remained calm. "Miss Susan, still skilled at turning tables?" I watched how Susan disregarded Max's feelings. It was as if she only saw him as a toy, a tool for her vanity, not a person. Susan sneered louder. "Let's see who's right here. I'm Max's legal wife, and you're shamelessly flirting with my husband." Disgusting. Ivan stood up, his face irritated. "Are you blind? Who's flirting with that idiot? Everyone can see Mary didn't say a word, and you're calling her names." I want to ask why Max looked fine before marriage but now looks miserable? No one was siding with Susan this time. It wasn't like the past life, where pretending to be wronged would get her endless sympathy. Did she think she was the genius mathematician's sweetheart from the past? People often idealize what hasn't happened. So, in the past, everyone pictured a happy future for Susan and Max and painted me as the homewrecker. But now that she married Max, the truth showed. Susan's ugly side got exposed. Whether she loved Max was clear from his condition. Susan lacked patience. She used to mock Max and disregard his affections before, so now? I cared for Max for 2 years, helping him improve. Many here had seen us together. Doubting eyes turned to Susan. I returned the words everyone used to scorn me. "Are you using Max as a cash machine?" Susan's face turned pale, then pointed rudely. "Him? A cash machine? I'm his caretaker. Without me, he couldn't even attend this conference." Susan's harsh words triggered Max. Anxiety washed over him, biting his nails, covering his ears, shaking his head. "No, don't listen." Watching Max, a part of me softened. I cherished Max, fearing his pain, yet he only knew Susan's rough ways. He looked up at me, muttering something I couldn't hear. I knew how to calm Max, but I stayed silent. "Max, is this the love you wanted?" Ivan's hand sneaked into mine. Since we started working on projects together, he liked showing affection. He pulled my focus from Max, and I turned to him with raised eyebrows. Ivan leaned lightly on my shoulder, feigning weakness. "Mary, I'm feeling down, care for me too." I chuckled. Ivan always acted like a rogue. Despite his behavior, he was mature and considerate. His soft approach left me puzzled. Max rushed over, pushing Ivan off me. Tears falling from his amber eyes, crying my name over and over. "Mary. Mary. Mary." He struggled to express his feelings and placed a hand over his heart. Susan yanked Max away from me, dragging him along. They left the meeting early. I watched them go, thinking, why bother? I never saw Max again after that day. He didn't have my contact info. The only number on his phone was Susan's. I teamed up with Ivan, and we kicked off a new research project. Studying math is tough. Winning awards might look glamorous, but it involves countless failures. You can't handle the isolation? Then math's not for you. But I have this stubborn resilience. Even if I fill a room with failed calculations over a few years, quitting never crossed my mind. When stuck, Ivan and I would escape the lab. We'd sometimes hike at night, waiting for the sunrise, or grab drinks by the sea, cursing math for being so damn hard. At our most struggling point, we couldn't even afford computer time at the lab. For weeks, Ivan and I manually crunched numbers, both of us a bit depressed by the mess of digits and formulas. 5 years later, we finally confirmed a new mathematical conjecture from a different angle. Our paper, with both our names on it, got published in Nature. That day, Ivan took me to a temple, untouched by commercialization. There weren't many tourists. Just this aged abbot praying before a rusty Buddha statue. I turned to see Ivan kneel, head bowed in deep reverence and gratitude. The words I wanted to tease him with got stuck in my throat. It felt like Ivan had been kneeling there forever, transcending lifetimes. Afterwards, I asked Ivan what wish he made. Ivan shook his head. Mary, it wasn't a wish, it was a fulfillment. Surprised, I looked up at him. When did you make a wish? Keeping secrets from me, huh? Trying to snag an award? Ivan stayed silent, just looking at me with eyes full of relief, as if he'd regained something lost. I've made a bit of a name for myself in math. Compared to my past life, where I was just Max's housewife, I'm now recognized here. Mention my name now and it's not as the wife of a genius mathematician or a scheming woman living off his talents, but as Mary, the teacher. Ivan's gaze towards me became more intense, like he was holding something back, unable to confess his feelings. Despite a rocky relationship in my past life, I still believe in love. I've got feelings for Ivan too. But I'm not eager to spill the beans. Being the best partners like we are now is pretty comfortable. The day before Ivan and I got nominated for the Fields Medal, I heard Max had died. The world felt like it was playing a joke on me. Max was nominated alongside us, too. In my past life, I helped Max verify a graph theory conjecture. But this time around, I never used Max's work to gain anything. I left those memories buried deep. Yet, Max figured out the graph theory earlier this time. As they announced his award, news of his death broke. They found drafts covered in my name in his study. Susan appeared in the public eye, accused of abusing Max mentally and squandering his money. The same student who accused me in the past spoke out against Susan now. Turns out, she had a crush on Max, all planned to target his wife. People online interpreted Max's drafts as a sign of his love for me. I found it amusing. This turn of events didn't make me want to spite Susan. Her downfall was her doing, becoming as hated as a rat on the street. With Max's death, she was summoned by the police 3 times, eventually stabbed by the student who exposed her. A video of the student, Linda, in prison came out. She looked unremarkable with her glasses, satisfied with a smile. Me? I liked Brother Max because he was so handsome. People like him, so fragile and incomplete, should be cherished. If I hadn't been caught too soon, I would have killed Mary too. I won't spare anyone who harms Brother Max. That's when I realized Susan and I both were reborn, probably because she was killed before too. I didn't attend Max's funeral. I'd been to his grave too many times already. But Max's death shook Ivan. With a bouquet of flowers and a planetary certificate named after me, he confessed his feelings atop a hot air balloon under a setting sun. Ivan, with his fiery, bold red hair, stammered, "Mary, I like you. Be with me." Looking at him, I teased, "Thought you'd keep it to yourself forever." Ivan, like a dejected puppy, "I had to. You know, living can't rival the dead. What if Max became your lost love?" I patted his head. "That doesn't sound like our Ivan. Where's your confidence?" Ivan's eyes tinged red with nerves. "Around you, I've never had any." Before accepting Ivan, I asked him, "Ivan, how long have you liked me?" His number vanished in the kiss we shared. I didn't hear it, but I didn't care. We have a lifetime to discover. Ivan's epilogue. Ivan had a secret. He loved Mary in both lives. Since first meeting her at his professor's home, he knew she'd be his. But fate worked in strange ways. He was always a step behind his brother Max. Max swayed his Mary, dimming her shine. He waited, hoping for Max's passing, prepared to be with Mary, even if at 70. Max's early death was unexpected. Ready to pursue Mary joyfully, Mary took her own life amidst blame. Ivan laid her ashes in the coffin himself. Unable to believe Mary had died, Ivan searched for her the next year, only to relentlessly pursue the truth. 10 years on, his red hair turned silver, then bare. A staunch materialist, he began believing in divinity. Ivan became a monk. He spent 30 years kneeling before Buddha, praying to meet Mary again. He was patient and finally got a message on message. "Hi, it's Mary." Max's epilogue. When did Max start seeing Susan as his wife? When he was little, Max wasn't into socializing. His parents went to great lengths for him, trying to make him and Susan good friends. Over and over, they'd tell Max, "Max, Susan is your good friend. You'll be lifelong friends. Today, we're going to Susan's house. Max, you gotta be nice to Susan. Max, look at Susan, isn't she adorable?" So, without even realizing it, having Susan around became a part of Max's routine. Even though Susan didn't really like Max, thinking of him as a nerdy little kid, Max was still willing to give Susan everything he had. Until that day, when they were returning from a math competition. That truck came crashing. Max's mom held Susan tight, protecting her. Even in her final moments, she was worried about Max. What would happen to her son? She was unwilling to leave but had no choice, so she pinned her hopes on her best friend. Max's mom's last words were, "Max, you've got to work hard to marry Susan. If you marry her, you'll have a new family to protect you." But Max's mom didn't foresee that Max had already found another family member. In his first life, Max was torn between his mother's dying wish and his reality. Unable to find a perfect solution, he ended his life in agony. In his second life, Max fulfilled his mom's wish. But somewhere along the way, he learned what love meant. He realized he wanted to marry Mary because he truly loved her. But it was too late, and Max died for his love. He hid all his feelings in the draft paper he cherished the most.